Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Michael Vargas. I'm a business consultant who works with organizations to create more collaborative and productive team cultures. This video is a series by Lead by Impact, talking to leaders who share their own hero's journey when it comes to team culture. And today we have an amazing man named Eric Burd. Hey, Eric, how are you?
Good morning, Mike. How are you, brother?
Good, man. Good. Just so everybody knows, Eric Burd is the Chief Sales Officer at Welk Resorts and has been in hospitality leadership for 15 years. He has a bachelor's in computer engineering from Wentworth, and his passions include family, travel, leadership, photography, health and wellness, which we just spent like 15 minutes talking about, philosophy, psychology, and technology. Thank you so much for being here. How are you, brother?
Another beautiful day, bud, and I just appreciate you making the time to connect. And it's been exciting. I know we connected on this a couple of weeks ago, so I've really been looking forward to it. And again, just really admire the work that you've been doing as of late, with your consulting business and just the way that you've been helping create a more progressive culture and work environment for more businesses and more individuals day after day, brother. So super grateful for your work.
Thanks, man. Thanks. And the way, so I call him Burd. Most people call him Burd. So the way Burd and I met was years ago when I started working at Welk. And just to be candid, I was terrible. And that's totally okay. I was not very good, but it allowed me to be in a culture that I had never been in before. This culture was one where people really came together, where people really loved one another. And that was the thing that I connected to so much about this organization. Was I've never seen a much more loving culture. So after that, Burd and I have been in connection and conversation ever since then. But watching Burd as a leader, I always thought to myself, that's a true leader. That's a true leader who puts themselves before other people, who works to figure out how I can actually get people to come together in new ways and make them better because they're part of this culture. So thank you so much for being here. And so can you tell the people a little bit about what is it that you do?
Great question. Well, I've been in this role because I've held over a dozen roles since I've been with the company. I came across the brand shortly after moving across the country from Massachusetts and have held multiple different positions. But this recent role I took on basically at the beginning of the pandemic. So essentially, this role it's really all about just building a team that can help drive performance and revenue to hit the company's targets. We are the main driving force to make sure that we bring in the revenue to help grow the brand, acquire new clients, expand business with existing clients, and make sure that, that we navigate through all the twists and turns that the business world brings, especially this last year. So a lot of this last year, because we did close down for a period of time, it gave us an opportunity to really build the team almost from the ground up again. We went down about 70 to 80% of workforce. So we were very intentional about the people that we chose to bring back. So we built the team with the players that we knew we were in alignment with. And it was really beautiful to see the way that they came together during the pandemic. And we had some of the greatest efficiencies that we've had in the last decade, even given the very precarious times that we were in. So at the end of the day, in a nutshell, my responsibility is to build a team that can continue to move forward and transcend regardless of what the environment is.
And I couldn't imagine someone else better perfect for that role. And so for you, good sir, what do you think? I know people want many things, but what do you think is one of those North Stars? What are one of those things that people really want in a team culture?
It's funny because whether you look at team culture, to me, it's a lot of it's not that different than what we want in our personal lives, right? At the end of the day, we want to feel valued. We want to feel understood. We want to feel that we have an opinion, we have a voice. We want to feel that we're a part of something that's bigger than just us as an individual, right? We want to be able to be authentic. And and that's just in general as a human being. And what that allows us to do is to operate at our best. We had a really cool uh, team summit a couple of years ago, and it talked about engagement, and it was very eye-opening for me, because the statistic of the average American worker is there's 70% of the employees are actively disengaged, meaning they go to work and they're just walking the pony around the track, as we say, right? It's just kind of like they're just hit on autopilot. They hit the play button, they just go, and it's just a job, and that's not what brings the best out of people, right? And we've been in that same sort of routine in our personal relationships as well, and we know how that feels, right? So I think at the end of the day, when it comes to, the culture that's so important, one of the biggest things is not having a culture that is just really slogans and rhetoric, right? We've had the environment to where there's all these beautiful buzz phrases now for business culture, with being your authentic self, and, and truly partnering with one another. And everybody has a voice and an opinion, and you hear those things. And then when it comes down to it, in actuality, you can't do those things. And the environment that creates, when those words are just rhetoric and they're not authentic. I think, frankly, people rather you be authentic about, hey, you know what? We're not going to do that crunchy, grainy culture. That's not how we operate here. It's all about business, and that's a wrap. And I feel like people would respond better to that, just knowing, well, okay, they shot me straight, you know. And at the end of the day, it's so important for our culture to be in alignment with what we say it is. That is a critical piece, because it's such a terrible feeling to where the words are here and the acts and the operations are over here.
And that's something that I think a lot of people get really caught up in. And, there's always this sense of, when I work with a lot of organizations, they're like, hey, can you help us really come from our, we want to really come from our values. And that's where we really want to drive from. And as I talk to them about it, they say, oh, we have the value of this, the value of that. But if I asked everyone on that team what that value meant separately, I would get different responses. So the next question is, it's not just the value or that thing, but what does that look like in real life? What does that actually translate? What do we do with it? And I think that's what a lot of organizations stop at, is they'll just say, here are our values, here are these words that we're saying that we're going to come by. But then it's like, yeah, but what does that actually mean? And I think that's what you're really getting at, is getting to the realities of, hey, what does this mean? What do we actually do?
Exactly. They want that alignment, they want that alignment. And at the end of the day, that's something that helps them be engaged. And when you have an engaged employee, that's when you're off autopilot. That's when they are more creative, and they're willing to share their ideas. They're willing to share their thoughts. There isn't a fear. And that's the other thing, people want a sense of security, and even if you're in a very, in a volatile industry, right, to where there are a lot of twists and turns, it's still us, and to create a culture to where they feel as safe as possible. Because when they feel safe, they may operate a little bit more fearlessly. They'll communicate a little bit more fearlessly. And that's something that helps solidify those opportunities and those possibilities on a day-to-day basis, rather than just operating from a position of fear. Or the last time I spoke up and I gave an idea, I got slapped down for that. I'm not going to do that again. Right. So it's important for people to, to be able to speak up, be a part of where we're going, have a voice, and knowing that, hey, every idea that they bring up, of course, we can't adopt, but at least, again, feeling like they're heard, so the ideas can keep on coming, right? Even if they, for every 100 ideas they send your way, if 10 of them are great, that's amazing.
There's a statement in my head that I've been working on and trying to bring more into the workshops, is that, yes, people want to be heard, but what people really want is to be considered, right? Actually digested of what people have, or what they're saying. So I love what you're saying here. Now let's dive in a little bit deeper here. For you, Burd, what was, let's say, a challenge you had one time regarding working with a team culture?
I think one of the biggest things when it comes down to culture is it, in order to really see its true potential, everybody has to be on board. The biggest challenges that I've run into is when you have that cultural dichotomy where there's silos, right? Where there is not that alignment across the board. You have this portion of the team that believes in these values and believes in this culture through and through, and that's the way that they operate. Every move that they make is through that lens. And then you have another piece of the brand that may not operate the exact same way. They may say those are the values and say that's how they operate, but at the end of the day, it's still a big division, right? And that's one of the hardest things to navigate, because then you're having the conversations. Well, hey, but hey, why do we do this over here? We say that we believe it, we do it, but then over here they're doing it this way. Why? And then and again, you can't further create division within the culture, so you have to have that conversation with them to mitigate that, because even though that may not be your area of responsibility, you don't want to further create any kind of rift between the departments and the different philosophies. So that's really been I think that's, for a lot of businesses, that's going to be a challenge when you only have half the team that are, sipping on the delicious Kool-Aid and the other is not, and I've seen, like, this was something that really struck me. And I was surprised. It was a big brand, with my cell phone provider, and it was a year or two ago when I upgraded cell phones. And it did seem like it was a little fishy, a little misleading with the purchase. And then when I talked to customer service later, they were just like, "Oh, well, that was sales, and that's just what they do over there." And I go, wait a minute. You're the same company. What are you saying? How can you be doing this on a recorded line right now, where they're pointing fingers and they're not the same brand, right? When ultimately, at the end of the day, everybody needs to be moving as one, holding themselves responsible and accountable as one across the board. So it's creating that balance of where the culture does exist all the way through.
That's something that it happens all the time. Like almost like subcultures are kind of created and divisions. And this was one of my favorite projects during my master's programs, was when I was studying psychology. It's from this book right here on community psychology. One of the things that is very natural is when people connect with a group, it's aligned values, right? We see things the same way, and that makes us right. Now, if we have another group of people that see something differently, well, if it's different, then if I'm right, then that must mean that they're wrong, right? Because there's no way that they're right, because if they're right, then I'm wrong. And then the bigger challenge is that then we start assigning morality to it. Well, if they are wrong, they are bad. And because they are bad, I am good. And it creates this dichotomy where it becomes an us versus them, rather than how can we make this work together. And I think just that simple example of the cell phone, it's them. That statement right there creates an us versus them dynamic within the company. So right there's a huge indicator that it's an us versus them, and they're not working together in a way that's going to get bigger impact going. So what were some of the things that you started, actually even before that, what do you think are the secondary effects of that when you have this dichotomy? What are the secondary things that happen because of that?
Well, I think it creates an environment to where, it's, well, I'm safe in this space, but I'm not safe in this space. And when people feel that way, to where they're constantly having to gauge who they're talking to, that does peel back on some of the potential of the safety that they could and should peel back on some of the creativity that they should be able to have access to, because it's always, okay, what audience do I have right now? So it really still ends up being an inhibitor and mitigates the potential of the entire team. When people have to spend and waste energy on those sort of considerations.
Right. And then when people aren't open, then you're not hearing more ideas, like you said. You're not hearing about other problems that are happening, because people don't want to then speak to them because they don't feel comfortable enough. So now you have to put out more fires on the back end. there's all these, definitely, when you say that people don't feel safe, that's something that can really cause a lot of damage for the organization, like more um, like the kind of like the emotions that are there, but also then the actual financial elements of it. And so when this is happening, what are some steps or some things that you started to do to try to right this wrong?
Well, first and foremost, it's, you know, identifying the fact that there is a dichotomy in the culture. And it begins with those candid conversations, so it's, first of all, it's awareness. One of my favorite books that I read last year was Radical Candor, and that was something we ended up reading together as an executive team. But again, that's a big part of it, to feeling safe enough to be able to be candid, and identifying that there is a challenge there, and really looking at, again, because it can be one person that can go against the grain and really inhibit the potential of the team. So it starts with having those hard conversations and understanding why. And there's just a lot of people, depending on where they come from, and I'm very empathetic to different styles of leadership. But a lot of people are just product of the way that they were raised. You have a lot of people that, people that in the business world in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, to where it was still a lot of a dictatorship, and don't ever speak up in a meeting. Why would you say that? You're foolish for saying that. How could you do that to me? And again, there's just such a huge gap between the ivory tower and the people that are actually on the front lines. Ultimately, those people are running blind at that point. The people that are on the front lines, they have one of the most valuable perspectives out there. So the first thing is really just identifying where are those gaps, having those hard conversations, understanding why, and helping them feel safe enough, because that's really one of the things. It's, people that, I don't want to say they're playing politics, but, that have been in a business world where politics do exist. It's hard for them to believe, yeah, right, you saying there is no politics is part of the politics. Right. And so it's almost people to feel safe enough to say, okay, you actually really want me to say how I feel? Yes.
So let's double click on that for a second, right? So first element is I opening up this space to say there's some stuff going on, like just calling it out and bringing that to the forefront. And then as you start the conversations, what are some thing or two or perspectives or actual tactics or whatever it may be that you're doing that allows people to kind of let the guard down and start openly sharing?
I think one of the biggest things, especially that just looking at that type of old school archaic leadership, or law of power leadership, as I call it, context was rarely given. Looking behind that curtain, and sharing the why behind choices that are made, that just creates the division furthermore, right? So let's say we have to make a business change, and maybe it impacts compensation, and to where, historically people might just say, here, sign it. If you don't want to sign it, go find another job, right? And it takes no energy to do that. You're not going to make a loyal employee. That's how you have a disengaged employee, and that's when people start looking for another job, right? But when you actually take the time and you share, here's why we're structuring it this way. Be willing to share financials that maybe would not historically be shown. Here's the situation where we're in. Here's where we're going. Here's the plan that we do have for you, and actually take that time so they can see and understand the why. Then they can really get behind it. And then it's the wow. Then they walk away going, wow, they really cared to take that time with me. Versus if you say, here, sign it, then what do? They go and talk to their other, their peers and go, man, I'm tired of this place. I'm just so sick of this. I need to find a place that values me and listens to me. And, and then they all start talking, and that's something that erodes the culture. So, so each conversation is so important. And I think at the end of the day, it's taking on the conversations, giving the context, sharing a lot of instances that I've had to navigate through, to be human to them, and to open up and share some of my journey, so they can truly understand. You know, it's me being vulnerable to them, so they feel that they can be vulnerable as well. You know, it can't be. You know, I used to think, and it was brought into my head, decades ago, and it took me a while to get it out. Is, hey, never let them see you sweat. Never have a bad day. You're always on point. You're always at level 10. You're always fired up. Your personal stuff never comes into this building. You've always got to be there, because if you're not there, how can they be there? And when you operate that way, it makes people feel like they can't be human, right? And that creates more of the division, less of the safety, less of the trust. So a lot of it is just being willing to be vulnerable and share the why, and take the time with people so there's an understanding.
And this is something that if you're, I hope people are really absorbing what he just said, because this is something that I've been making sure to bring into my facilitations when working with these organizations. And the way that I kind of have like a similar, same, but different perspective on it is this idea of power. There are all sorts of power dynamics. And one of the ways that you can help empower other people, right, to have other people feel empowered, is by bringing more clarity to the process, clarity to what's going on, so that they know what's actually happening rather than it just being this invisible force. So when you take the time to explain why, that's allowing people to have way more clarity, and it helps them feel empowered, because now they get to make a much more informed choice. Now they feel like they're more included in what's happening. And then that makes people feel more engaged and safer, because they are now empowered to open up a little bit more. So I'm just so excited to hear. And this is one of the main reasons why you're on here, right? Because you have these amazing perspectives of how can we really empower other people. And I think that's a beautiful example of that. So now let's talk about that, like as a secondary effect. So you said, hey, we have these things to work on, and you started bringing more clarity and talking about the whys. What does that then do for people? What's the secondary effects of that?
Well, it gives people, and then from that point you have the conversation, and then there's a path to a certain outcome, and there's an accountability to it. So lots of it's going to start with baby steps. Hey, you know what? Here's one thing that I want to see you start doing. I want to see you start raising your hand in those meetings. I want you to challenge me. If I say something that's a bad idea, say it in front of everybody, because I'm okay with that. Don't let me go down the wrong path because you were afraid to speak up. And so a lot of it's putting the ego aside as well, and just making sure that you make the right choices together, and holding people accountable, and having those touch points, right? So it might start with speaking up and challenging, and then debriefing after. Hey, how did that feel to be able to speak up in that meeting and to share that thought? Hey, you brought some really good insight in there. Thanks so much for doing so. And then encouraging that behavior. So and then that's when they start to go, wait a minute, okay, this does feel pretty good. Maybe this does work. But it's constant, and it just can't be that one conversation and then you disappear. It's something that you need to continue to nurture and see and support that behavior when it's going in the right direction. And also, if they're taking it too far, or that's something to just help them understand the guidelines to operate within. And in doing so, you do see, typically you'll see that behavioral change. Now, on the other side, during that coaching, which of course shows them that you do care and you are vested, which just makes people feel great and safe as well, is you can have the other side of the spectrum to where they're not, to where they're still continuing to struggle with it. And depending on how, and you work as hard as you can. And that's one of the things is, I sleep well at night, because you give everybody your best opportunity to change and to morph into the culture, understanding that everybody has a slightly different journey to morph and fit into that culture. It's a unique conversation that's special to them. We all have our own growth curves. We all have our, our areas of opportunity, and we all have our strengths. So it's helping them, move to that new space and culture that we ultimately want to be at. and having the hard conversations if continually they're not getting to that point.
Yeah.
And that's when you have to have the harder conversations, because at the end of the day, you know, it's give everybody the chance, give them a second chance, and sometimes give them a third chance. But ultimately, you know, if the way that we need them to operate is too far away from what feels authentic to them, then they're never going to feel good in the cultural direction that we're going in, and they're going to feel just completely unauthentic, and they may feel safer in another environment. You know, some people don't feel safe being open, some people don't feel safe challenging, right? Some people don't feel safe in certain the cultural environment that we have, and at that point in time, you know, there's a mutual understanding of, you know, maybe there's another opportunity that makes more sense for them.
Right. And that's okay, because in the long term, it's the idea is looking for a win-win, right? So what's going to be best for them and what's going to be best for us. And sometimes that might mean doing something different, like for them to maybe go somewhere else. And that is totally okay. And as you were talking about previously, how you make sure to reinforce um, people challenging you and people speaking up in meetings. I just imagine, you know, we're all human and we have these childlike moments. So in my head, I imagine like all those leaders as like little kids standing behind mom, going like this, and then feeling safe to then walk in front of mom and then get closer and closer and closer to the playground, and then they get to start to play. And I think that's kind of the environment that you're creating for adults in the leadership world, is letting people feel safe enough to be able to open up and come closer and closer and become more authentic, and create this space where we can all figure out how can we play nice with one another.
And you know, speaking to that metaphor, you know, what ultimately starts to happen as the children are going to the park. Later, mom, not hiding behind mom anymore. They're just right down the slide, right? There's no hesitancy, because again, that's something that costs time. It costs energy. And right now we need to be ridiculously optimized. We're still navigating through a pandemic, right? We're still understaffed. So we need to be so effective with our communications that, you know, we don't have time for that hour-long call. You know, we need to be able to communicate in a way to where we feel safe enough to say, hey, this is what's going on. Let's get down to the bottom. Let's figure this out, and come up with a solution in 5 minutes. You know, and it's so fun because we go, wow, that was great. Oh, all right, we're all good. We're all good. All right, cool. Boom. Y'all just got 50 minutes back on your calendar. You know, and those are just the coolest calls. And I just, that's something that's so satisfying to me, is when we get to that point to where the communications are so transparent, and they're just ridiculously optimized. You know, you start to really understand. And when people are always sharing how they feel, you can sense exactly how someone will respond to something, you know, so you can just communicate in a way that is ridiculously effective. And again, that's just how we have to be right now. So it's been really cool to see how the team has really adopted that type of partnership and that type of communication. And then when you communicate that way and there's an understanding, people want to help each other even more. That's one of the things that has been so cool since we've transformed the culture, is now all the other business partners that are outside of the sales space, you know, it's just, wow, working with this person has just been so great. Thanks so much. And you know, and then it's, hey, whatever you need, what can I do for you? Right? To where again, people are approaching it as a career, not just a job. When you do need to take that 9 o'clock phone call, hey, what's up? What can I do for you? Or that 5 a.m. phone call, because this just happened. You know, there's that tribe mentality. You want to be there for each other. But when it's a career, or when it's a job and you're punching your meal ticket, you're not taking a phone call that early or that late. And then what happens when that happens? Then there's a big disconnect. Then it becomes a bigger issue in the morning, and then it's a whole nother thing that needs to be dealt with in the morning. You know, so there's just such a cascade effect of that type of culture. And again, you can get to a point to where it's purring so well, it almost seems like it's easy.
I was talking to a buddy of mine who's CEO of a design company in San Diego, and he was talking about the ripple effects that can happen with a team culture, right? So you can work on this culture and then it starts having these effects on other elements of the company or even the community, where now their cultures start to shift because they've been exposed to the culture that you've created. And just to double down on what you said earlier, when people are thinking, oh, team culture, that's playing nice and things like that, it's like, no, let's be clear. Let's be selfish here. You want more time back, you want more efficiency, you want less problems. The more you clear up your team culture, the more you create that high performing team culture, you're just going to save a bunch of time on the back end. You're going to save so much time. So it's not just about playing nice and feeling good, which is definitely a big part of it. It's about getting stuff done as quickly as possible so that you don't have to waste time, so that you can then put your efforts to the more important things, to the things that really need a lot of time, energy, and space. So I really appreciate you speaking to that ROI on it. And so when you've created that, right? So that's been the beauty of it. What do you think is one of the biggest lessons that you've been able to learn from all this? One of the ways that you've grown when you've worked to create this much more open and engaging team culture?
Well, I really think it's, you have to defend the culture at all costs, at the end of the day. And I think some leaders, they may be hesitant with having those hard, candid conversations. And, the more that you put those off, exponentially, it's going to be inevitable the amount of hard conversations that you'll be forced to have or forced to be had with you, because you're not having the conversations that need to take place. And ultimately, looking at the two different types of cultures, you've seen where people are working so hard, right? You see, we're talking about at the end of the day, from the business perspective, from the performance perspective, we have people that work so hard and they're spending their whole day maybe putting out fires or tripping over anthills. And it's all of this energy because the culture is not right, that they're spending all of this energy and it looks like they're really busy and they're doing, and they're on the phone all day, but nothing's getting done because all of these fires that are being put out really should have not started in the first place, because we didn't have the culture and communication that should have been taking place. So there you are, and then that just further tanks the culture because no one feels good. People are frustrated and the performance is down. And then people, when performance is down, people get frustrated more easy. People are harder on each other, so it just continues to snowball in that direction. But when you're brave enough and courageous enough to defend the culture, it's the exact opposite of that, right? Then you're spending all of your energy on high level items, and you're ridiculously efficient on those high level items. So it allows you to, in a sense, get more done, exert less energy. So now you have a bigger plate to take more of a workload on. And at the end of the day, it's also more satisfying and it's more enjoying because now we're winning more, we're winning together. You start to get you get a thrill about how optimized. It's like, we just solved that in 5 minutes. That was awesome. So it's at the end of the day, the simple answer is at all costs, you fight and you defend for that culture. And when you have that, everybody's lives are easier and, much more enjoyable.
Completely agree. I'm going to steal, by the way, tripping over anthills.
Yeah.
I love that because I see that all the time. I just got done. I'm in the middle of a series of workshops with this nonprofit for domestic violence. And we just went through looking at their decision-making process. And there was so much ambiguity, not a lot of clarity, a lot of confusion. And so we finally got the team to streamline it. And not only is it going to allow them to have more clarity, but now they're going to save so much more time because of that. And because of that, they're also now going to focus, like you said, on the more important, more strategic, more impactful decisions and really have the mental space and capacity for that. But it was them coming together to try to figure out what's like looking at our decision-making process. There's not a lot of clarity. Let's get super clear. We're all on the same page about it. And they also created it together. So now they have this ownership over it. And so now they're going to have that efficiency and that speed. And so this is them now holding to that team culture, really saying, okay, this is how we're going to show up. This is how we're going to be together. And because of having that conversation, which sometimes can feel more like a little more work in the beginning, again, just save a whole bunch on the back end. Eric, I am so happy that you were here with us today. I mean, this is why I brought you on, because you have such wisdom and you truly have the heart of a leader, and not just the heart, but then the application in the realities of it. And I would just want to say that I appreciate all the things that you do for your team and for all the ways that you treat people. And it's been an honor to have you on this interview today.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate you taking the time in your busy schedule. And that was a lot of fun. As I mentioned, it's looking forward to it. And it is an honor and privilege to be a part of this journey that you're on. And I just love, again, there's so much room for business culture to improve, and I think that with the modern employee today, they're speaking up now, and it is important to them. You want to get the most out of them, you've got to have that right culture. So what you're doing is helping, not just from a business perspective of helping brands perform better, but really helping people have a career instead of a job, to where they don't mind getting out of bed. Maybe they're actually excited to get out of bed to go do what they do every single day. And that's the kind of corporate culture that we need. So just super grateful for you, Bud, and thanks for taking the time with me today.
And real quick, if people want to learn more about you, hear more about you, hear these words that you have to say, how can people learn more about you?
Well, you can check me out on Instagram. It's Eric J. Burd, at Eric J. Burd. And I did actually, during quarantine, one thing that I did is I did a little YouTube channel to help my team, and heck, even help myself have something to do every single day. So there was a little channel called Creatively Connecting. So there's the journey of quarantine there, and some of the struggles that I went with, and a lot of feedback that I got from friends, family, coworkers. So that was a journey, but they can connect with me there, and don't ever hesitate to reach out. And if there's any topics that people would love to discuss, I'd love to be a part of it. This is one of my favorite types of conversations to have. You get all these great minds together, and that's how you come up with just great ideas, solutions, implementation, and as you can see, both of us, we love expanding our mind and seeing how we can help touch more lives. So a couple different ways to connect with me, but definitely looking forward to reaching out.
Well, thanks again, Eric. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for spending the time with us during this story. And if you'd like to hear more about leaders and about team culture, you can visit us at leadbyimpact.com. Thanks again, Burd. I'll talk to you soon, man.
Take care, Mike. Have a good one, bud.
Bye.